Manaus, Amazonas, February 2020. A city surrounded by the forest, crossed by rivers and igarapés, where natural beauty coexists with a harsh and silent reality. In some neighborhoods, the state does not reach with enough strength, and what fills that space are their own rules imposed by criminal factions. It is in this setting that a story begins, one that would shock Brazil. In the southern zone of Manaus, neighborhoods like Educandos carry marks of inequality, but also of intense daily life. Crowded streets, active commerce, families trying to follow their routines. But behind all of this, there is another layer, less visible and far more dangerous. A reality where young people grow up exposed to influences that can shape their destinies far too early, where the line between innocence and involvement with crime can disappear without warning. At the center of this story are two teenage girls, Sigrid Libório Santana, 13 years old, Thaisa Caroline da Silva Azevedo, 14. Two young lives just beginning, with dreams still undefined, paths still being built, but with different trajectories that, for some reason, crossed at that specific moment. According to what would later be pointed out in the investigations, Sigrid had already been moving in environments where people connected to crime were present. It is not entirely clear to what extent this was a choice, an influence, or simply a consequence of where she lived. Thaisa, on the other hand, according to the information released, had no direct connection to that world. She was a friend. She was there because of proximity, companionship, perhaps without realizing the risks around her. And many times, tragedies begin exactly like this, not with clear decisions, but with simple connections. In the days leading up to their disappearance, nothing seemed unusual to those looking from the outside. Conversations, outings, routines that appeared normal, life going on as it always had. But away from most people's sight, something was already unfolding. Suspicions, accusations, and decisions were beginning to take shape within a system that does not follow official laws, a system known in many regions of Brazil as the Crime Tribunal. There are no formal rules, no defense, no fair trial, only rapid decisions made by those who hold power within these organizations. People are accused and sentences are carried out with no possibility of reversal. According to the investigations, Sigrid was taken to this type of judgment. The exact reason was never fully clarified to the public, but within that logic, there was enough of an accusation to put her life at risk. Thaisa was with her, and in that moment, that alone was enough for her fate to be sealed as well. At some point in February 2020, the two girls disappeared. For their families, a period of anguish begins to grow with each passing hour. Calls go unanswered, messages receive no reply, and the feeling that something is wrong becomes impossible to ignore. Time behaves differently in moments like this. Every minute feels heavier, every silence more alarming. Meanwhile, far from any help, far from any real chance of intervention, something extremely serious was already taking place. One of the most disturbing elements of this case is that it did not remain hidden. Part of what happened was recorded. Videos began to circulate, showing moments that should never have been captured, much less shared. This detail intensified the impact of the crime, transforming not only the violence itself, but also its exposure into something deeply shocking. Days later, the confirmation comes in the worst possible way. The bodies of the two teenagers are found in an igarapé in the Educandos neighborhood. The news spreads quickly. The city reacts with shock. Families are devastated by grief. What had once been a disappearance is now recognized as a brutal crime, one of the most striking of that period in Manaus. And even with the discovery, many questions remain. What exactly happened during that judgment? Who was involved? Why was Thaisa, who apparently had no connection to crime, also killed? How could something like this happen without being stopped? Those answers would only begin to emerge later, but at that moment, all that existed was silence, impact, and the certainty that two lives had been irreversibly taken. And this story was far from over. The days following the discovery marked the beginning of a deeper and more disturbing phase of the case. As news spread across Manaus, authorities intensified their investigation, trying to reconstruct the final hours of Sigrid Libori Santana and Thaisa Caroline da Silva Azevedo. What had initially been treated as a disappearance was now undeniably a double homicide, and the pressure for answers grew rapidly. Very quickly, one element began to stand out. The crime had not only been carried out, it had been recorded. Fragments of videos started circulating on messaging apps and social media. Even though authorities and media outlets avoided sharing them publicly, their existence became widely known. The recordings, according to investigators, showed that the girls had been taken by individuals connected to a criminal faction and subjected to what is commonly referred to as a crime tribunal. In these nezakonnik proceedings, accusations are presented without evidence in any legal sense, and there is no opportunity for defense. The outcome is decided by those in control, often based on internal rules that operate completely outside the law. According to the investigation, Sigrid was the primary target of this judgment. The exact accusation was never fully clarified to the public, but within that environment, it was enough to justify a sentence. Thaisa's presence, however, placed her in a tragic position. Even without clear involvement, being there, witnessing, or simply being associated was enough to make her a victim as well. In many cases like this, individuals who are not directly involved still become targets, either to eliminate witnesses or to reinforce fear and control. What happened next was an act of extreme violence. Authorities confirmed that both girls were killed shortly after being taken. The brutality of the crime shocked even experienced investigators, not only because of the victim's young age, but also because of the calculated nature of the act. It was not impulsive, it followed a pattern seen in organized criminal actions meant to send a message of control, a message of power, and a warning to others. After the killings, their bodies were disposed of in an igarapé, an attempt to conceal the crime. But it did not take long for them to be found, bringing the case into the public eye and triggering widespread outrage. As the investigation progressed, police began identifying suspects believed to be involved in the abduction, the so-called trial, and the murders. Some arrests were made, and connections to organized crime groups were reinforced by the evidence gathered. The case exposed, once again, the reach of these factions and how deeply they can influence certain areas, especially where vulnerability is high and opportunities are limited. But beyond the investigation, beyond the arrests, there was something that could not be undone. 2 lives had been lost. Two families were left with questions that no legal process could fully answer, and a city was forced to confront a reality that often remains in the shadows. In the end, what happened to Sigrid and Thaisa was not just an isolated act of violence. It was the result of a system operating outside the law, where fear replaces justice and where even the youngest can become victims. And perhaps the most unsettling part of all is how easily it happened. The exact timeline of the day the crime occurred was never fully reconstructed in every detail, but investigators were able to piece together a sequence of events that revealed how everything unfolded. On that day, in February 2020, Sigrid Libório Santana and Thaisa Caroline da Silva Azevedo left their homes as they had on other occasions. To anyone around them, there was nothing to suggest that this would be the last time they would be seen alive. At some point, they were approached or taken by individuals later linked to a criminal group operating in the area. From there, they were moved to another location, away from public view. It was in this controlled environment that what is referred to as a crime tribunal took place. According to the police investigation, Sigrid was the focus of the accusations. While the exact motive was never completely clarified publicly, authorities indicated that it involved internal rules imposed by the criminal organization. These rules, often informal and arbitrary, are enforced with extreme severity. Thaisa was not the intended target. However, her presence during those moments placed her in immediate danger. Investigators believe that, because she witnessed what was happening or was simply associated with Sigrid, she was also condemned. What followed was a deliberate act of violence carried out by more than one person. The nature of the crime, according to authorities, showed signs of planning and coordination rather than spontaneity. It reflected a pattern consistent with executions ordered within organized crime structures. At some point during these events, parts of what was happening were recorded. This detail would later become crucial for investigators, even though the circulation of such material caused additional distress and outrage. After the killings, the perpetrators attempted to dispose of the bodies in an igarapé in the Educandos area. The intention was likely to delay discovery and avoid immediate identification. However, this attempt failed. When the bodies were eventually found, the case quickly escalated. What had begun as a missing person situation turned into a major homicide investigation, drawing attention across the city and beyond. Police forces in Manaus began working to identify everyone involved. Using witness statements, digital traces, and information gathered from within the community, investigators started to map out the network behind the crime. The existence of recorded footage, even though not publicly released, helped confirm the sequence of events and the participation of multiple individuals. Suspects were identified, and some were arrested in the following days and weeks. Authorities linked them to a criminal faction known to operate in the region. The investigation pointed to a structured chain of command, suggesting that the act was not isolated but part of a broader system of control and punishment. Despite these developments, many aspects remained unclear to the public. The exact accusation against Sigrid, the full list of those involved, and the internal decisions that led to the final act were not entirely disclosed. While the investigation moved forward, another reality unfolded quietly, away from headlines: the families. For them, The timeline was not built from evidence or reports, but from absence. From the moment the girls stopped responding to the confirmation of their deaths, everything was marked by uncertainty, fear, and eventually irreversible loss. Grief in cases like this is complex. It is not only the pain of losing someone, but also the weight of how it happened. The public nature of the case, the circulation of videos, and the attention it received made the mourning process even more difficult. Families were left not only with memories, but with questions that may never be fully answered. What could have been done differently? Could it have been prevented? Why did it happen at all? Even as arrests were made and the investigation advanced, those questions remained. In the end, what the police uncovered helped bring a degree of accountability, but it could not restore what had been taken. The day of the crime became a permanent dividing line. Before it, there were 2 young lives still being written. After it, there was only silence, memory, and the lasting impact of a tragedy that reached far beyond those directly involved. To close this story, it is necessary to look beyond the crime itself and focus on what came after, because what happened to Sigrid Libório Santana and Thaisa Caroline da Silva Azevedo did not end with the investigation. It echoed. Across Manaus, the reaction was immediate. News of the case spread quickly, and with it came a wave of shock, anger, and deep sadness. The fact that 2 young girls had lost their lives in such a violent and preventable way struck a nerve in the population. For many, it was not just another crime, it was a symbol of something much bigger. People began to speak out. On social media, in communities, and in local discussions, there was a shared sense of indignation. Questions were raised about the growing influence of criminal factions, especially over young people. How had it reached this point? How could teenagers be pulled into such dangerous environments? And more importantly, why wasn't it being stopped sooner? For many residents, the case exposed a reality they already feared, that in certain areas, parallel systems of power were operating openly, imposing their own rules and punishments. A reality where fear silences witnesses, where communities feel unprotected, and where justice does not always arrive in time. But alongside the anger, there was also reflection, because beyond the headlines, beyond the investigation, there was a deeper issue that could not be ignored: the vulnerability of young people. Protecting children and teenagers in environments like this is not a simple task. It requires more than policing. It requires presence, opportunity, and guidance. Families play a central role. Open communication, attention to behavioral changes, and awareness of social circles can make a difference. Many times, early signs go unnoticed, not out of neglect, but out of lack of information or support. Schools are also part of this protection network. They are not just places of learning, but spaces where young people can find direction, structure, and sometimes even refuge. When properly supported, they can help identify risks early and guide students towards safer paths. Communities too have power. Local initiatives, social projects, sports, culture, these are not just activities, they are alternatives. They create belonging outside of crime, offering young people other identities, other futures. And then there is the role of the state. Security is essential, but it must come with prevention. Investment in education, social programs, and community development is not optional, it is necessary. Because when these structures are absent, other forces step in to fill the void. The story of Sigrid and Thaisa is, at its core, a warning, a reminder of what can happen when vulnerability meets influence, when silence meets fear, and when systems fail to protect those who need it most. But it is also a call to action, because while their story ended too soon, others are still being written, and the difference between tragedy and protection often lies in what is done next, in the attention given, in the choices made, in the opportunities created, and in the collective refusal to accept that stories like this are inevitable. They are not, and that is where the ending truly begins.